in traditional academia archaeologists, okay, and let's call them the establishment versus some of the guys that are challenged, like yourself. Okay, let's just
like
say
me and Randall Carlson.
Sure, let's call it anti-establishment, the establishment, the traditional way of looking at it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And what is their position on this? What do they say? So these are the ones that have all the degrees and the fancy degrees and universities and professors and all these papers they've written. What do they teach students since they're
They don't take the ancient maps seriously. They think they were exercises in fantasy by ancient map makers. They don't believe that Antarctica was discovered until 1820. They think that some map makers just thought that there should be a landmass at the bottom of the Earth and just stuck it there imaginatively in exactly the place that Antarctica is. They dismiss the whole line of reasoning on that. But for me, I'm not claiming that these maps prove there was a lost civilization, but I am saying they are a huge anomaly and a puzzle, which I have plunged myself into. I'm following my curiosity wherever I go, and I'm doing so in a journalistic, not in an archaeological way. So what archaeologists study, much of it is very useful to me, and I have great respect for many archaeologists, and they do very detailed, nitty-gritty work down there in the dust, and it should be valued and it should be treasured. But I don't think it's the only way to investigate the past. I think we have to take other issues into account as well. So, for example, with the Great Sphinx of Giza, archaeologists will tell you that the Sphinx is the work of a particular pharaoh, Pharaoh Khafre, who they say built it during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC, give or take 50 years. There isn't a single contemporary inscription that says Khafre built the Sphinx. Nothing whatsoever. There is a stela that's in between the paws of the Sphinx, but that was erected more than 1,000 years later, and it doesn't even contain the name Khafre. It did once contain the single syllable Kaf, but the rest of the line is missing, and there's nothing on it which says Khafre built the Sphinx. That pharaoh who put that stela up some centuries later, could have been saying that Khafre restored the Sphinx. There's nothing contemporary that says Khafre was the maker of the Sphinx. And there are other stela on the Giza Plateau which say that even Khufu, the predecessor of Khafre, knew the Sphinx. The Sphinx was already there in his time. So I think that the Egyptological case to attach the Sphinx to Khafre is extremely flimsy. The Sphinx is roughly in front of a second pyramid at Giza, which is attributed to Khafre. That's one of the reasons they connect it to him. And they think that the head of the Sphinx looks a bit like Khafre, although I kind of disagree with that. But that's not a central point. I and my colleagues, Robert Boval, John Anthony West sadly passed away, Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, Randall Carlson as well, are generally of the view that the Great Sphinx was originally a fully lion-bodied statue. And that it goes back more than 12,000 years. And I can explain to you why we think that.
Please.
That it goes back more than 12,000 years. That the head sticking up there, the lion head, was badly damaged and eroded. And that in pharaonic times, perhaps indeed in the 4th dynasty, perhaps even during the reign of Khafre, they remodeled the head and put it into this head wearing a classic ancient Egyptian pharaoh's headdress, which is called the Nemes headdress. But what we think is that there was a lion there before that. And there's a very special reason for that.
Why is that?
Well, there's two reasons, actually. The first reason is the orientation of the Sphinx. The gaze of the Sphinx targets directly the rising sun on a very special day of the year, and that's at dawn on the spring equinox. That's when night and day are of absolutely equal length. The Sphinx looks directly at the point where the sun rises, and you can confirm that today, and I have done, by going on the Giza Plateau before dawn, stand behind the Sphinx, and you can see that it is looking directly at the Sphinx. And in fact, the Sphinx is perfectly oriented due east, and your monument must be oriented due east if it's going to target the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox. The sun does not always rise due east. In the summer solstice, it rises far to the north of east. In the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, it rises far to the south of east. But on the spring, it's like a pendulum along the horizon. But on spring equinox, spot on, due east. Now, the question is, in the ancient world, what was considered to govern the character of a world age was the constellation that lay behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. In our epoch, the 2024, the epoch of 2024, and indeed going back right to the time of Christ, going back to AD 0, the constellation that housed the sun on the spring equinox was Pisces, and it remains Pisces to this day. It will quite soon, within 150 years or so, be Aquarius that's housing the sun on the spring equinox. We all know the old song, we live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. That's actually what it's all about. This effect of the constellation behind the sun constantly shifting as though it's a kind of roundabout that's going round and round behind the sun is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth. The Earth is our viewing platform from which we observe the stars. And that wobble causes the rising times of different stars and constellations to change in a very slow process. It's a complete cycle which unfolds over 25,920 years. And as a result of our observation platform being the Earth, and as a result of the Earth wobbling, we see the sun housed, that's the language that tends to be used, by a different constellation roughly every 2,160 years. So we've had Pisces for 2,000 years plus. We're going to have Aquarius. Before Pisces, it was Aries. At that time, the symbolism in ancient Egypt was all about rams. If you just go to the temple of Karnak in Upper Egypt, you'll find that there's an avenue of ram-headed sphinxes which lead down into the temple of Karnak. Well, not those, no. It's the front entrance. We need to see the whole front of the temple. That one on the top left. Yeah, these ones. These are ram-headed sphinxes. These are celebrating the age of Aries. That's when Aries housed the sun at the time that the Temple of Karnak was built. Go back further and you'll find that Egypt's all about bulls. Why? Because before the age of Aries, it was the age of Taurus. It was the constellation of Taurus that housed the sun. You have to go back 12,500 years ago, before our time, to find a very significant constellation housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. And that's the constellation of Leo. And to cut a long story short, what I and my colleagues think is that the Sphinx was originally constructed as a terrestrial representation of the constellation of Leo, that it targeted the constellation of Leo when it rose behind the sun. That's the first reason. The second reason is the geology of the Sphinx. And here the work of Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University is fundamental because he has demonstrated to the fury of Egyptologists and has received a great deal of extremely negative criticism from Egyptologists, but he's a highly credentialed geologist. And he's stuck his neck out, looking at the erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx, and particularly because the Sphinx has been constantly restored, particularly on the trench out of which the Sphinx was cut. You can see these deep vertical fissures and a kind of scalloped, rounded profile, and that is classic rainfall-induced weathering. And in Schoch's view, the Sphinx at some point in its history was exposed to more than 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. And the bottom line is, such rains do not fall in the Giza Plateau today. They did not fall in the Giza Plateau 5,000 years ago, but they did fall on the Giza Plateau if you go back 12,000 years. That was the time when the Sahara Desert was green. That was the time when the world climate was completely different.
And this is what the attributing for the creation of Plato's lost civilization of Atlantis over 11,500 years ago.
Yeah, but by the way, don't necessarily believe everything you read on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is an agenda-driven
Even the founder says that. Yeah, I agree with that.
You're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this, but the last 13 and a half years I've been working on my first fiction book to write, ever. Fiction book to write. And while I finished this book, a year ago, I got the strangest phone call about one of the characters in the book where the guy wanted to meet with me and he read the book. And afterwards is like, wait a minute, am I the villain in the book? This is a story about a character named Asher, who is half Armenian, half Assyrian, whose father was involved in the Iranian Revolution, linked to Savak, working with the Shah, that they escape and he gets recruited to a secret society. Well, when you go to the secret society, it's been around for a couple thousand years. They've developed some of the craziest leaders of all time. And they test you. There's unique tests that they have at this society where they test to see your emotional mental toughness. One of the tests that they have is very rigorous. It's purely mental. Of course, there's a physical one, but one is mental and emotional. If you're Armenian, if you're Syrian, if you're Persian, this is a book you're going to be reading and saying, holy moly, this is the kind of stuff you talk about in here? Yes. If you're somebody that's fascinated by history, this is a book for you. Characters. There's a technology that this society, secret society, builds where you go into a vault. I won't spoil it for you. When you go down, they have a technology where you get to sit down and watch and have a 3-4 hour conversation with Tupac. You can set up a debate between Karl Marx and Ayn Rand. Karl Marx is in the book, who wrote Communist Manifesto. Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged, is in the book. Marilyn Monroe explains the concept of seduction and sex in the book. When you read the book, it's about development of the next leaders in the world and how they do it and how they've been doing it for many years. And it's also about how to prevent the end of civilization and how this organization goes about doing it. So I've never written a parenting book before, but if I ever wrote a parenting book, this is the closest thing to it because it's all mindset, a lot of crazy stories. Again, 13 and a half years. Trust me, I told myself I will not publish this book until I sell my insurance company and I'm fully disconnected from it, where it's no longer my responsibility 100%. When you read this, if you're a creative person, if you like fiction books, if you enjoyed Atlas Shrugged, or if you enjoy Divergent, if you like books like that, I think you're gonna enjoy reading this book. It's the creative side. Business books is very easy. Here's how you do it. Here's how this how it works. This is very creative. If you haven't placed the order yet, now you can order it on Simon & Schuster, Amazon. I'm going to put the link up below somewhere here, maybe even in my profile. Go order the book and read it. I've never written a book where I can't wait to read your reviews to see what you think about this book. So I'm going on this wild journey, and we have some plans with this book here. If you support the things that I work on, I would appreciate you going and reading the book, order the book on Amazon, and then post a review.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.